Very good afternoon, fellow leaders, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, In Conversation with the Commission of Charities and the Charity Council 2022. This webinar is jointly organized by the Commission of Charities, Charity Council, Law Society, Pro Bono Services, and the Center for Non-Profit Leadership. My name is Kitson, and I shall be your moderator for this afternoon. Before we begin, here are some important matters I'd like you to take note of. Feel free to ask any questions during the session. We will be using Pigeonhole for our Q&A. Those in the audience with us this afternoon, as well as those of you who are viewing this on Zoom, you may scan the QR code or key your questions into pigeonhole.com on your browser. The code for the session is 130422. I repeat, 130422. We will do our best to address them during the session. Please note that the discussion in this session is not intended to constitute professional legal advice. You should still consult a lawyer if you require specific legal advice. Our panel for this afternoon are Mr. Desmond Chin, Commissioner of Charities, Dr. Gerard Ee, Chairman, Charity Council, and Mr. Gregory Vijayendran, Senior Counsel, Chairman, Law Society, Pro Bono Services. Thank you to our distinguished guests for joining us this afternoon. Fellow leaders, this is the first time we are having a hybrid format for this session. We have representatives from the various charities in our audience today, as well as all of you, 900 over participants joining us via Zoom. For today's program, we will first have an opening address by the Commissioner of Charities, followed by a panel discussion, and finally, wrapping up with a Q&A session. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Desmond Chin, Commissioner of Charities, to give us his opening address. Commissioner, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at our first hybrid event of the year. The last time I had spoken on stage was 18 months ago, and that was a long time ago, and I think I'm suffering from stage fright at the moment. It's good to see all of you here today. About 25 of you are here physically in this room, and over 900 of you are on Zoom. So I just welcome everybody, especially those of us who are Zooming at the moment. I've attended a similar event that was organized by the Singapore National Cooperative Federation, SNCF, similar to this format. They called it a phygital event. And so this, I guess, is our version of a phygital event. And I think moving forward, such events will be more commonplace. Before I begin, I'd just like to say a few thank yous first. I'd like to thank LawSoc Pro Bono Society Services and Center for Non-Profit Leadership for co-organizing this webinar. They've been wonderful partners, and we've been working with them for many years now, and we'd like to thank them for the long-term support. I also like to thank Gregory, thank you, Tony and Kitson for always being there for us, and it's a pleasure to work with them as well. Now, secondly, but most importantly too, I'd like to thank all of you, the charities, who have for your service and your dedication to care for your respective communities. I know that these last 2 years have been very difficult for all of you, but you have pressed on unswervingly. You have pressed on to deliver your programs and services to your clients. Thank you for that and for sticking it through the last 2 years. After 2 years of COVID, we are now transiting towards a new future. And one of the good things about COVID, I think, is that all of us have now learned to be more agile and to be more resilient. We have also learned that nothing stands still and that constant, that change is a constant. And being able to adapt is really something that will see us through, that we will need to do that better in the new COVID world. Now, at a recent Singapore Institute of Directors event, someone asked me this question on good governance. And she asked me, what would be the difference in terms of governance in a pre and a post-COVID world? I thought it was a very good question. I spent some time thinking about it. But in the end, my conclusion was there should be no difference. And because donors and the public expect charities to be well run and to be properly managed, whether you're in a COVID situation or you're not. So there's no difference, in my opinion. If I may use an analogy for good governance, I think good governance is like a strong foundation of a building. Without a firm foundation, the building sits on sifting sand, and it is unsafe, and you're not careful, it'll collapse when the wind blows. Likewise, good governance is the bedrock upon which our charities must sit on. It gives donors and the public much confidence when they know that your charities are well governed. Now, recent economic and societal changes around the world have shown that the public have become more and more vocal than ever before. This is no different in Singapore, as you well know. Nothing stays hidden for long. With a click of a button, the views are posted online and on the social media, and within seconds, it will go viral. So, if you have any weaknesses in governance of your charity, these can be made known in a very short time, putting you and your charity in a very discomforting position, somewhere where you do not want to be. If you don't want to be in this situation, then we must put attention and put effort in ensuring the good governance of our charities. And if I may say so, good governance is certainly not just a written policy or a checklist for us to go and tick the boxes. Good governance requires a proper framework, establishing clear policies, having good processes in place in managing the overall direction and the effectiveness and accountability of our charities. It is not a good to have, it is a must have. And it lays a firm foundation for your charity. And it's only with strong governance that a charity remains effective. And this is something that we must watch carefully so that it can weather all storms that come. Today's topic is on future-proofing your charities. You need to do so if you want your charities to be sustainable in the longer run. But to be future-ready, the basic fundamentals must be right. And what are these? Well, if I may suggest, the very first step that we should take is to bridge any legislative compliance gaps that we may have. The Charity Act requires all charities to prepare and to submit three things. First, your annual report. Secondly, your financial statements. And thirdly, your governance evaluation checklist that must be submitted annually and on time. These also need to be uploaded onto the charity portal for the public to access. If the public can access your statements and these three documents that are necessary, and they see that they're in order, they will be much more confident in volunteering and in giving the donations. Now, unfortunately, not all charities have done so. A number have made these submissions, but when they have done so and we checked it, it's been tardy, it's been careless, inputting inaccurate and leaving out critical information. For institutes of public characters or IPCs, you are expected to uphold even higher standards of governance. However, we have noticed in our course of work that there are non-disclosures of certain critical information, such as a conflict of interest policy, your auditor certification, the total amount of tax-deductible receipts that you have given out, and your reserve policies as well. IPCs, please, you must remember that being an IPC is not a right, it is to be earned. Now, such tardiness won't do, and it cannot continue. I would like to remind all that this is a regulatory requirement, and failure to do so can render you to some very severe penalties. And if you don't know what the penalty is, it's a fine of $10,000 and or a jail term of 3 years or both. So board members, you have a duty of care to ensure that these submissions are done and done well, and because the reputational damage to your charity can be significant if you don't take care of this important foundation. Now, please submit all your annual reports, your financial statements, and your GEC requirements correctly and on time. Many of you have been doing excellent work. So let the public have a chance to know that your charity is doing well, and you can do that by putting these submissions online quickly, on time, and in an accurate manner. If you're not very sure what to do, please reach out to us. I'll be more than happy to help you. This is beginning to sound like a counseling session. Now that I've got it off my chest, can I move on to share another aspect that I think is important. Yeah. Another good governance practice is to ensure that you have the right people in your charity. I think all of us in this room knows that, and all of you who are watching, zooming in. Whether they are your board members, your volunteers, your management team, or the crowdfunding platform partners that you're working with. Some of you have shared, or rather, with the rise of the number of scams that we do see nowadays and the wrongdoings, you need to safeguard your charity against fraud and any malicious attempts by parties that want to do you harm. So it's critical that you do your due diligence checks to protect your charity, your reputation, and ultimately your clients. I know some of you have shared with me intermittently that you already have difficulty sourcing for board members and volunteers, and as a result of that, conducting such checks is yet another barrier to entry. But not to do so really exposes you to very high risk. And a bad case of fraud or losing your donors' money will result in a reputational damage that will erode the public's trust and confidence in your charity. So I think it is a smart thing to do, and it's a wise thing to do. Now, minimally, your charity should perform diligence checks on your board members and key officers to ensure that they are not disqualified under the Charities Act. I say this because we have come across cases where board members have had a past criminal conviction that borders on that involves dishonesty. And we have had the unpleasant task of calling up the charity and telling them to ask the board member to step down because he wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. And then it gets complicated and everybody gets upset. So you want to avoid that, do your checks first, right? So you start right from the beginning. You can do so by checking the insolvency searches via the IPTO's public database. Now, you should also ensure that your board members and your key officers declare and disclose any prior convictions. I think you do it right up front, it makes it so much easier. Now, in addition, you should also conduct working checks on your working partners, especially if you intend to send monies overseas to high-risk jurisdictions. You can do so by checking against the United Nations sanctioned list, and for charities who support overseas missions regularly, you can consider subscribing to a World Check. You do not want, believe me, you do not want your donations to end up with some terrorist organization or entities that are front for money laundering. We have seen enough of such cases, so do have a care. You do not want to be party to it, and even it's unknowingly, yeah? Now, we all know that good board leadership helps charities thrive. Now, this is the key topic of today's in-conversation. As there will be a panel discussion and a Q&A later, I will just then briefly touch on only two things. One, the board's roles and responsibilities. And I know that I've seen the list of people who are here. Most of you are board members, and this is important, as well as succession planning. An effective board is one that is clear of its roles and responsibilities in leading your charity. The board sets policy directions. It ensures proper governance. You help open doors, and you help your charity access resources. And you must support your management team. But it is the job of the management team to execute. It is not the job of the board to do that. Your management team executes the policies that you set. So don't confuse your role with that of management. Please do not overreach. We have seen cases where the board thinks that it is the management team, and it relegates the management team to a corner and makes the life of the management team absolutely miserable. So don't do that, please. Now, one of the board's first responsibility is to ensure that you have a succession plan in place, because none of us are indispensable, not even if you are the beloved founder chairman of that charity. I know we all love our founder chairmen. They are wonderful people because they gave a lot of time, commitment, and money on all the effort to set up the charity. Now, but we are not indispensable. At some time, we need to hand over. Our timely board renewals will help precisely to seed new ideas and thinking and to prevent ossification of the charity. You obviously also do not want to change your entire board at one go because that's a silly thing to do. Space it out, do it in batches so that there's always continuity and of knowledge, of experience, and of decision making. Now, one thing that is important, we must always choose our board members based on competencies and the roles that they can play. And of course, that they must have the right motivations. Diversity and inclusivity are also important. But please do not put in your friends or your family members onto the board because they are friends and family members. You will set yourself up for failure. You'll be subject to untold sorrows when complaints of nepotism, special dispensations, and gory allegations arise. So please choose your board members wisely. I have had enough complaints, anonymous and whistleblowers, being sent to the charity unit, the COC's office, complaining all these things that I just told you about. And when we check, it looks half true. And if we check a little further, in some cases, they are true. So I don't think you want to put yourself in that position. So please don't go down that road. Yeah. Cyril O'Hoole, an educator, once said, "A good board is a victory, not a gift." And indeed, this statement is so true because it takes hard work, time, and effort to develop an effective board. So we must all start today so that a good board is indeed a victory for all of us. If you are unsure where to begin, then there are many resources available in the charity portal, such as the Board Appointment Guide for Charities, as well as the Handbook on Effective Non-Profit Boards. Now, should you need board advisory services or potential board members, then please go to CNPL. They are here to help you and they'll be glad to do so. Now, I just want to finish off with just very quickly to share a little bit about the available resources that you can have access to. Apart from these guides and the CNPL, we also have various partners under our Shared Services Initiative who are dedicated to help charities strengthen your regulatory compliance. So for example, Law Society Pro Bono Services provides legal guidance on amendments to your constitution and compliance with applicable regulations. If you need guidance in drafting your terms of references for your boards and committees, please reach out to them. There are other shared services partners can also be found on the charity portal. Now, earlier on, I mentioned the importance of board having the right skill sets and competencies. So may I encourage you to tap on the training grants that are available under the Charities Capability Fund to support your key board members in building up their skill sets and helping them do even better than how they are doing right now. There are other grants under the CCF, such as consultancy, ICT, and shared services. More information will be shared by my team after the Q&A. Now, in conclusion, Toba Bita, who is an Indonesian writer, said that good governance is about being proper and prosper. We want all our charities to grow from strength to strength. And to do that, we need a strong foundation of good governance so that our charity sector can be both proper and can prosper. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We shall now invite our two other panelists on stage for the panel discussion. Dr. Gerard Ee, Chairman, Charity Council, and Mr. Gregory, Senior Counsel and Chairman, Law Society Pro Bono Services. As a reminder to our audience, you may wish to submit your questions via Pigeonhole. Once again, the code for the session is 130422. We will attempt to address them either during the panel discussion or at the Q&A segment. Today's conversation will be centered upon the need to accelerate change and to design policies that demonstrate your charity's long-term commitment to governance and growth. With a goal this big, sustainable strategies and multilateral collaboration are essential fuel for a thriving charity sector. And one such fuel is board renewal. This is an important responsibility of charity boards, that is to facilitate new ideas and independent thinking whilst retaining adequate expertise and corporate knowledge to minimize risk. For a start, we hear many charities mentioning about embracing the new normal, as well as pre-COVID and post-COVID. We also have some questions submitted earlier on this topic. What background should the board consist as we navigate through the new norm, about the anticipated gaps in the social service landscape, and moving into a post-pandemic era? These were some of the questions that have been submitted earlier. And I remembered in one of our earlier conversations, Dr. Ee, you mentioned that where governance is concerned, there is no pre-COVID or post-COVID. Perhaps Dr. Ee, would like to share your thoughts with us on this?
Yeah, I think people use the COVID as an excuse for the past. I think many organizations have not got their act together, and easy way out is to say, okay, let's move forward post-COVID and deal with it. I tell you, challenges have always existed for organizations. Comes in various forms during the different stages of organizations' life. What COVID did was to wake us up that things can happen suddenly and catch you unaware. And for those who haven't already got their act together, they really suffered. Your governance not in place, and all of a sudden you have this COVID situation where you have to make quick adjustments in organizations. How do you move? Because you haven't got the SOPs established, you don't have the processes determined, you really don't know what to do, and COVID is a good wake-up call. But moving forward, it's not because of COVID, but it's because a good organization should have worked out all your SOPs, all your processes, your governance issue, have them documented, because that's the only thing that will ensure your organization is sustainable. Because people will come and go, it doesn't matter who is on your board, your board changes, but it's all documented. And whoever is in there, it'll make life easy for them to continue running the organization efficiently. I remember there was an organization which I shall not name. It's religious organizations, and you know, religious organizations, every 3 years, they change the person in charge in this particular case. So I was telling them, I say, every 3 years you go through the same pain. The incoming person appointed to take charge have to find out what is happening. And by the time she's found out what is happening, 3 years gone up. And then she retires and someone else comes in. I say, it's so inefficient. Is that how you want to live? Is it sustainable? And they took me very seriously, and they got a team together and start documenting the processes so that whoever is appointed to take over at the end of 3 years, just come in, have a 1 hour briefing session and ready to run with the show already. So governance is a must, whether it's pre or post-COVID. It's nothing to do. COVID is the wake-up call for all of us. And after COVID, there will be other surprises that will hit us in the face. But if we have our governance in place, we are ready to face anything that comes along the way in a much better condition.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee. You mentioned also about surprises that may surprise the board. You know, perhaps you'd like to share a bit more. I believe that a lot of the charities today are concerned about fundraising. They're concerned about the new era for the boards. And just the same as what we have today in terms of a hybrid event, will this be new challenges for the board?
Well, certainly, if you are prepared, those of you who are involved with schools, little do you imagine, because of COVID, all of a sudden you got to adopt IT in a very big way and get ready to have your children continue their education from home. So you haven't already had a governance in place where you actually think about risk management, what can happen in the future, talk about using IT. You're literally caught your pants down because you are so ill-equipped. But for the schools who have already anticipated it, thought about it, they adapted to these needs quite easily. Those in a nursing home, because they don't have in place a committee that look at possible risks, and when the nurses tested COVID positive, all of a sudden you're short of staff and not enough people to handle the patients that you have. So, and what is your contingency plan? Nothing, because you never even anticipate that such a thing could possibly happen. So COVID is good, is a wake-up call for us, and hopefully one of the things we've been advocating at Charities Council is you really need to have risk management as well. To look, you may not be perfect, you may not anticipate everything, it's quite impossible to anticipate everything, but as long as you are, it's part of your DNA to think what can go wrong, and prepare for the best, then the exceptional thing that really catch you off foot will be quite minor, because you already been prepared for possible scenarios that can arise. And I think government has already warned us, COVID is not the end of it. There could be other pandemic that is going to come around the corner. So let it be a wake-up call. Don't take it as something that requires you to change, because it should have been part of your DNA already. Good corporate governance that include strategic thinking, risk management, the whole works.
Definitely, I mean, in terms of good governance, and I believe this is a subject very close to the Commissioner's heart. Yes, Commissioner.
I just, thanks, Gerard. I just wanted to add to what Gerard had to say on risk management. I had visited 2 charities, and I just share very quickly with you. One of the charities we visited was a nursing home. And you think simple things like a glove that you need to wear during COVID period is just a glove, no? But I was walking to the car after the visit. The CEO was telling me, you know how much my costs have gone up. And he took out a glove. He said, this glove, every day, my 100 over nurses use thousands of these gloves. And every day, you multiply that by a month, a week, a month, a year, and nobody reimburses us that for the gloves, right? And this is just a glove. And then it struck me, yeah, okay, so what's your other? So it's a cost that is unexpected. It adds on to their already thin margins, and the operating cost has gone up. The second charity shared with me and my team when we visited them was I asked them, how do you get your revenue? Is it grants? Is it fees and services? And then they told me it's 100% grant. Sorry, 100%. Yeah, not a grant, sorry. 100% fundraising on one single event. And I asked them then what happened? They said, oh, in 2019, I think, or 2020, because when there was a lockdown, that signature event couldn't go on. And so they had zero income for that year. And it was a tremendous shock for them, because they didn't expect the COVID to hit them in that manner. And so the great thing is, the wonderful thing is that they quickly pivoted and they diversified their sources of income. And this year, when I met the same charity again, they now have a much better footing. So yes, I mean, Gerard is right. You know, charities need to look at your risk management events that could affect you. What is your business continuity plans, and how you can prepare for the future, looking at some of these events that can take you out of surprise, huh? Out of the blue, it comes to you like a thunderbolt. Thanks.
Thank you. Gregory, you have anything to add to this?
Yes, just adding my own additional perspectives in addition to the wisdom that I think COC and Dr. Ee have shared. Just to underscore also what Commissioner has shared with us about the need for firm foundations, the whole charities governance that needs to be put in place. I think it's a wonderful thing to be visionary, to see how you can scale up, to see how you can grow, touch more people's lives, etc., depending on the kind of mission that you have. But if your foundations, are not strong through the charities governance, eventually there will be a crisis on your building, and so you need to pay a special attention to that, whether it's from dedicated staff, compliance staff that's paying a special attention to that side of the ball. But it's obviously something that all board members need to look at with a lot of care and caution. I agree that COVID hasn't transformed that fundamental facet, but COVID has showcased, I think, two things. One, deficiencies that have been pre-existing or perhaps were fault lines that were really there in a charity. And that's something Dr. Ee has also eloquently touched on. The second is it also showcases the strengths that are needed on the part of the board. For example, do you have people who can steer the ship when a crisis happens, when it's a fairly existential type of issue involving that charity, solvency issues, liquidity issues, for example? Do you have the right skill sets on the board? And then what about sustainable fundraising? How do you ensure that you continue to have sufficient donations to keep the ship going on and navigating in that journey? And Dr. Ee, of course, has had rich experience of being that stabilizing factor. If you look at his past experience as well. So I think you need to be able to discern whether you have the right skill sets. And sometimes, crisis will of course showcase those character qualities. It becomes the litmus test for resilience of the organization as well as the individuals who are leading the organization. But if not, then can you get additional help, whether on the board or the right kinds of advisors, whether it's a legal advisor, accountant, or someone that can come alongside to give that type of expertise so that you know what to do. For example, just to give one example from a solvency setting, if you are facing solvency issues, that you cannot enter into contracts willy-nilly because what if you can't pay the contractor for services? Then there's questions of personal liability there. So you need to be able to make sound judgment calls in such settings. So underscoring the need for firm foundation, but also recognizing that the pandemic has showcased both deficiencies as well as strengths on your board and strengths that may be needed.
Thank you so much, Gregory. In fact, all three of you have talked about the thriving charity sector, managing risk, as well as having the right skill sets. And definitely the firm foundation, we want to move on to this topic of board renewal. And that's basically a good way to mitigate risk and to manage risk. So board renewal is an important responsibility of our charity boards and to facilitate new ideas and independent thinking whilst retaining adequate expertise as well as corporate knowledge to minimize risk. So good board nomination and renewal ensures sustainability and success in meeting a charity's mission, objectives, and goals. Let us now look at a case study. So Charity A has a total of 7 board members, out of which 4 board members were founding members and have been serving on various positions on the board across the years. As part of the charity's succession planning process, they were sourcing for new board members as successors. Their strategy was to seek the who's who in the industries to add credibility and connections. They were also hoping to find political office holders as their patron. The committee was also exploring what to do with their retiring but still passionate board members. In fact, this case study was developed based on some of your questions that were submitted. In fact, we have received a total of 142 questions that were pre-submitted before this session. And that's in addition to those that you're posting right now. So perhaps let's hear from our panelists as well. Well, board renewal is often discussed. Any views on this? Who would like to share? Okay, I see Dr. Ee is really picking up the mic. Yes, Dr. Ee.
Maybe I'll answer this question by building on what Gregory has talked about board. A strong board that can deal with surprises that comes up. If you imagine a scenario, what do you mean a strong board that can deal with any surprises that organization encounters? So straight away, you will see that the more diversified your board is, you have a pool of talents with different backgrounds, different experiences, and therefore enhances your chance of coming up with a better solution to deal with the surprise that your organization has been hit with. Just imagine you have a board all of like-minded people, all accountants, or all lawyers, or all doctors. You may have good solution, but it'll be very narrow in perspective. But if your board is so diversified, you have an architect, you have a lawyer, you have an accountant, you have an IT person, the chances of you coming out with an answer to what you are facing now is so much better and so much enhanced. And your organization will face different things as it evolves and grow. And therefore, the needs in terms of the composition of board will change. So along the way, all of a sudden, your organization reach a stage where you say, oh, our dream of building the annex to our building has finally arrived. We have saved enough money to go into it. Wouldn't it be good for your board to invite someone from that field, maybe a professor in architecture or someone that was in the industry, to join your board to guide you? Otherwise, if all your board members don't have the experience and you have all the consultants making presentation, you don't know what questions to ask because you're not familiar with the whole subject of building and extension. So that brings to the subject that from time to time, you really need to have board renewal and refresh your board so that the diversification is suitable for the needs of the organization at that particular point in time. And if your mind is even open where you have no bias you will consider having women in your board, you will consider people of different beliefs, different things, it makes your board so much richer. And the more bias you have, you narrow your scope. So diversification means all that, and it's sure it will prepare you to deal with surprises as it comes along the way.
On the topic of diversity as well, there was this question that was posed earlier, how to encourage young people to join a charity board, and should we also appoint patrons who are political office holders or persons with influence?
I'll quickly answer the young one because I tell you why. I'm 73 years old, so I'm qualified to talk about involving young ones. I've been involved with a few other programs on mental health, especially on suicide. Let's face it, a room of adults who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, how can we possibly understand what makes the youth ticks? What is important to them? How to communicate with them? So we really, depending on what you're dealing with, you certainly need to have representation from the age group. Even though you can argue not necessarily on your board, but certainly the younger a board member is, they'll probably be more connected with the younger population. Really, you ask me about what makes the youth ticks. I don't really bother that much to watch all this video stuff, whether it's on tweets or whatever it is, my children do. So if you ask me what do they like, I really don't know. From time to time, I log into there, I say, why they waste money eating in all these places? I until today, I still cannot understand. My kopi O cost me 90 cents or $1 now. And these people think it's fine to pay $8 for their coffee, but that's the way they are, So yeah, I think include some young people. If your program is dealing with young people, it will help you to understand them better and therefore design your programs better.
Gregory, I believe you want to add something.
Yes, so I go back to your case scenario and just kind of fasten my attention on that. And if we look at that study, we know that that this is a situation where 4 out of 7 of the board members, majority, are sourcing for new board members as successors. We go back to a point that I think have been raised by COC as well about organization life cycle. You need to know where your charity is in terms of life cycle. How important is it for you to be able to have a refreshed board, or are these the early days when you need to be able to establish foundations of a different sort from what we talked about earlier, which is really more missional and trying to essentially put the parameters around the work of the charity. But the problem with this situation is one where instead of finding like for like, or perhaps people that could essentially replace them in terms of their competencies and skill sets, they are looking for the who's who in the industry to add credibility and connections. And so you have a problem there because in that sense, it's the wrong question and the wrong inquiry on the part of these outgoing board members. It's about really discerning what the competency gaps are, what are the skill sets you need at that stage of the charity's life cycle, and trying to find people who can serve in that setting. The patron is a red herring because that's obviously nothing to do with management. That's really about patronage for the charity. And then when we talk about process, of course, for the more mature charities and non-profits, you would have a nomination committee, and sometimes they would be the ones to shortlist and to put up recommendations as well. But from the point of view of diversity, I think Dr. Ee has spoken about that as well. The question is, what kind of diversity do you need for that board? Occupational diversity, I think we touched on that. Gender diversity, I think there's a question coming up. We've got also the whole age diversity and trying to induct some of the fresh blood, the young ones, onto the board. And so I think those are some considerations about the member, but about that particular scenario. Then it ends off by saying that the committee was also exploring what to do with their retiring but still passionate board members. And so that raises questions such as, is there a need to have an advisory board if, for example, these founders have valuable counsel and could become a circle of counsel around that charity? Not because they are indispensable or because they need the calling card because it gives them their own psychological sense of identity, but because they remain valuable in the interest of the charity. And so then the question is, can you identify something appropriate, set up a structure, for example, advisory board, and some of the retiring members can then serve on that. Now, it's not meant to be figurehead tokenism. In a charity that I used to serve in, Club Rainbow, I was super intentional as the president, and my colleagues agreed with me that we will never make a major policy call in terms of trying to expand our mission or vision without consulting our advisory board. That was the kind of ethos we adopted. And so we benefited from that council once or twice a year, meeting up intentionally. And so that's something to consider as well. But going back to brass tacks, and it's important to go back to those foundations, because in the Charities Governance Code, that there are requirements that you need to also honor. So for example, for board members, you must submit yourselves for renomination and reappointment at least once every 3 years. And you know that in the case of a treasurer, there's a maximum limit of 4 consecutive years. And then you can't take up that role until after 2 years. And you need to pay a special attention to the succession planning for presidency as well as the treasurer role. So those are the parameters, or you might say the baseline points, but then bear in mind the additional nuances that I've shared.
Thank you so much, Gregory. Commissioner, maybe like to add. Actually, there's one question that's directed to the Commission as well. Board members in some charities are elected. Are we able to submit names or nominees to COC prior to elections as part of the screening process? So this is also another follow-up question, perhaps that we will touch on.
I think the screening process is best done, as I explained in the earlier opening address. You can do the checks there yourself, and you should go there. I think it'll be difficult for us to be able to tell you who you ought to appoint and who you ought not to appoint. If you're a regulator, and so that would be a difficult thing for us to do it. So I wanted to say comment about the putting political office holders onto your board. I think I visited a charity not too long ago, and the CEO was explaining to me his organizational structure, and then he told me I have a patron. So a patron was a political office holder. And after that, he said I have a second patron, a third patron, and a fourth patron, and in the end he had 5 patrons, and 5 patrons are all political office holders. So I asked him, "Is your life very difficult?" so he said, no, very helpful, which is a wonderful thing. But I think when you have whether it's a political office holder or some other philanthropist, I think for you to decide who to be your patron, you really got to see whether they have enough time. I mean, we all know our POHs are very, very busy, so they may not have enough time and attention to give to you. And therefore, you must be very clear if you have a patron on board, what you need the patron to do. And the patron does not have very much time, then you got to use whatever little time he or she has for a very specific purpose. I just so this gentleman was really funny because he had so many patrons, and I'm not sure how he manages his I can imagine every meeting he has because he meets up with them also quite regularly. Now I just wanted to talk a little bit about your composition of your board, right? Some say should we put prominent people, so and so forth. So this time last year, I had breakfast with a friend, and she called me in desperation to say she wanted to talk to me about a charity that she's working in. So over breakfast, she told me that she was working in this particular charity. There were some issues in that charity, and she went on for about 15 minutes talking about, I don't know, I heard few words like AGM, election, nomination, my name, chairman. And after 15 minutes, I asked her, you mean you became the chairman? I said, yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I became a chairman of a charity that I'm telling you I have problems with. So I asked her, why in the world did you become the chairman? I said, well, they put out my name and they asked me, and I felt there was a need to help out, and so I helped out. I said, okay, so what's your problem with the charity? He said, oh, some governance issues. So I asked her, you have a chairman? Said, yeah. You have a vice chairman? Yes. You have a treasurer, assistant treasurer, secretary, assistant sec. Do you have a lawyer? You need a lawyer on your charity board? I said, I have two, but one not very good. So I said, get rid of the lousy one. I said, okay. Then she said, I asked her, you have a good accountant? I said, yeah, fairly good. I said, find a better one, right? So now you must have an accountant, you have a lawyer. Then I asked her, your charity looks like you have a lot of publicity, right? Do you have someone who understands marketing and comms? I said, looking for one. Okay, so marketing and comms. HR, very lousy. So look for a good HR person. And technology now, digitalization. So you are trying to automate stuff, and see, then you got to buy services or have someone on board. So you count, and believe me, last night I read all the 140 or 60 questions that the charity submitted. I read all of them last night. I slept at 12 a.m. this morning. Yeah. And somebody asked about composition, what is the appropriate size of charity, right? Was it 11, 14, and 3, and so on and so forth. So when I counted 11 already, right? Chairman, vice chairman, the sec, consec, assistant sec, and so on and so forth. I counted 11 people. Then if you are in a certain charity like education sector, you need people you should have someone who understands the education sector on your board. If you're in health, then of course health, and so on and so forth. So easily, if you're a large charity, anywhere between 11 to 14, so please not look for people with the right competencies, not because whether they are POHs or prominent businessmen and so on and so forth. I mean, that's important, but the running of your board and the composition and people on your board is even more important, that they have the right skill set so that when trouble comes, they can come together and solve the problem. On the day-to-day, you can run your charity properly, giving confidence to the public in the way in which you're managing it. Ken?
Well, Commissioner, you mentioned about finding the right people as well. So there was this question that came out as well. Shouldn't we be finding board members who can work well with us rather than complete strangers? This was one of the questions that was submitted in the 140 plus that you read. Yeah, but
I missed that one.
yeah, perhaps I'd like to share a bit more on some insights into this. This covers also a bit in the areas of board dynamics.
I remember Gerard gave an answer, a very good answer to this once. And if I remember, you said, and please forgive me if I quote you wrongly, right? I think the issue said was, if you don't know a person very well, right? People hesitate to put the person on the board. But Gerard said, And I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that. He said, well, all it takes is for you to have a cup of coffee with the chap to understand his motivations, to understand what is it that drives him, what is his where he wants to contribute. And then you can make a decision for yourself after a coffee with the chap. The second way to do it, which I've seen some very wise chairmen in state boards that I served on, they have all sorts of committees. They are not board members yet. So they set up whatever, rehabilitation committee, nomination committee, so on and so forth. And they invite the person to come in after having their coffee to start off there first. And after a year, 18 months, then they find, hey, this guy is really good. And then they ask and invite the person to sit on the board. And that person also had a chance to try out doing charity work in that capacity. And then they can make an informed decision whether they want to come on board, because they know by then what this charity stands for, what the dynamics are, whether it's a well-run charity or a lousy one. Yeah, thanks.
I will add on the subject on when people say, I'm more comfortable in appointing someone that I know well. I think I urge you to reflect, what do you mean by I know well? How often do you meet this individual for you to say, I know well? And just compare that, how many years it took you to really know your own wife well? And here you are, someone you very easily say, I know well, I invite to a board, something that's important. So I think it's a fallacy. And I really believe that there's no substitute in doing your homework. Okay, meet the person, and it's not whether it's a nice person or not nice person. Does he believe in your cause? Does he believe what the organization is standing for? Is he the right person for the organization? So forget about this thing about being comfortable with someone that you know well, because really you don't know anyone well. They're all acquaintances except for those that you have spent a lot of time over the years that you call truly a friend.
Maybe just to add, although I think I will really be a supporting act to the tremendous wisdom of having kopi before you invite the person, to serve on the board, because you want to really suss out, the person's, character and, and have your own comfort levels and discern before you invite. If it's involving a person that you totally have no knowledge or prior history or prior relationship with, and there's tremendous wisdom in that. There's tremendous wisdom in what Commissioner has said as well, in terms of trying to draw from your ranks after you've given them a trial period in terms of serving, in terms of subcommittee and so on, because it's a test of their own commitment. But I will just flag three distinct aspects: chemistry, competence, and character. So chemistry is, I think, the tough one, because like Gerard is saying as well, how do you really know? You will never know until you've had a lot more time with the person. You put them in the same setting as you are. You see how they work in terms of practice. You don't want to have a thorn on your side. You don't want to have someone whose addition to your board will affect the team dynamics, and then you end up with forces pulling in different directions or disharmony, right? None of us want that. But we also need to recognize that sometimes we can be blindsided by a groupthink approach, where everyone thinks in a certain way. Part of the whole underlying thinking behind diversity is that you kind of have a fresh perspective, and perhaps even a different way of thinking, perhaps even a dissentient point of view. And out of that will come perhaps the greatest wisdom that your charity needs at that juncture. But chemistry is a tough one. And I think unless you meet up with the person, you're comfortable. Like last week, I had my second coffee. Some colleagues had that coffee, and after that, we invited the person to serve on the board of one of the charities I'm on. So that's chemistry. Competence, you've got board match, and the wonderful work of CNPL. If you need professionals, ISCA is more than willing to help. Law Society Pro Bono Services, which I chair, we've introduced a scheme on honorary legal advisors as well. So, could some of those competencies just be an adjunct that could support what the board needs, even if they're not serving on the board per se? Character, we go back to a fundamental point that Commissioner raised in his opening address. There are disqualifying points as well they need to be aware of, right? Somebody has a criminal record and therefore they can't serve on the board. But what about other aspects of character? And so there it's your due diligence, right? The need for reference letters, testimonials, and the like. So those are the 3 points to bear in mind: chemistry, competence, character.
Thank you so much, Gregory. In fact, we go back to the case study, and quite interestingly, there were a few questions on this topic as well. How to gracefully exit long-serving members. So, I mean, there were some that actually posed a question: how to advise a hostile EXCO member to step down to allow for cohesion and for the rest of the council to perform duties, or how to implement a succession plan when older members are reluctant to leave voluntarily or to retire. And it's also very challenging for those who have contributed for a long time to make way. Any advice on how to do this best? I can hear there's a fair bit of laughter in the room, yes. I believe our 3 gentlemen have to take time to think who should answer this.
I'll dive in first. And on this point, I mean, you have the easy lever, I would have thought, of your code of governance, because that clearly states that every 3 years, all board members must submit themselves for renomination and reappointment. So you have that soft lever where every 3 years, they come up for consideration. And as long as that is done in a meaningful way, it's not perfunctory, it's not autopilot, but there is serious consideration whether the skill sets, the competencies are appropriate for the next lap. And there's application of mind on that part, whether from a nominations committee or from the existing board. Then you already inbuilt a system. And rather than getting into a relational issue and awkwardness when you're dealing with the person, you just point to the code of governance and say, I have to do this, so everyone needs to be reconsidered. And you put in a process so it doesn't come across as being personal. So that's an easy lever, but I'm sure there's other wisdom on that.
I will address this from the individual's point of view. I've been on many boards and I've stepped down from boards. The question that would pose to the mind of the individual who feels offended because he's not reappointed to continue on the board is, are you with the organization just to be on the board, or are you with the organization to help the organization to do good work? Do you really need to have that title? And I think search your conscience. I think something is wrong if you feel so offended that they need to have a change in the board members. They're not chasing you away. You can still continue to help the organization. Why do you need a title to help organization where you're supposed to have believed in that cause that brought you to the organization in the first place? So I think to every individual who feels offended, ask yourself that, why are you there in the first place?
Just to build on what Dr. Ee has said, I think it's important for board members to recognize that serving on the board is not a privilege, but it comes with an entire bundle of responsibilities and obligations as well as duties. And I think when that's underscored, the duty to act in the interests of the company, duties of diligence, fiduciary duties, and so on, then it becomes a very serious responsibility. And it's why we serve for a season. And we look at, as Dr. Ee has reminded us, based on the best interest of the charity and also the long-term interest of that particular charity. But a soft point for the organization to remember is, let's give honor where honor is due. So where there is, people or persons who have served, a fair number of years who are stepping off, can you do a thank you dinner? Can you do something small and meaningful to record your appreciation for them? Give them a token of appreciation. So you give honor where honor is due, and there's a graceful way and also an honoring way to recognize their contributions. Can you memorialize this in your annual reports? These are the counterbalancing points, because I think sometimes in this sector and some other sectors as well, the honor that we need to show people, not that you kind of venerate them or anything, but you honor them.
A very good example of that would be some of the clubs. I'm sure you visited clubs where they have the little tag name of the past presidents. So those people no longer continue as a president. Doesn't mean he stopped going to the club. He still go to the club regularly and support the club. And that should be the spirit of it.
It's looking at me, so I've got to answer this as well. 3 months ago, a friend of mine gave me a call and asked, Desmond, I'm in this particular sports association, but the founder members refuse to step down. And every time we come up with new ideas, it always gets poo-pooed, and nothing progresses. What do I do? So I asked him, you're the secretary or treasurer. I can't remember who's the secretary or treasurer, but one of these two very important posts. He said, I think it was a secretary. I said, constitutionally, how are you all doing? He said, oh, not very well. I said, very good. Governance, how are you doing? Also not very well. And some of the things they do is done, I think it's not in accordance to some of the internal controls and processes. I said, has this been going on for quite a long time? I said, yes. Then why don't you take the Charity Act and point it to your founding chairman and tell him that he's in breach and he may be liable for a $10,000 fine, a 3-year jail, or both. And you should send one of each to the founding member and the founding members as well. And then he said, oh, that's a great idea. So, so I think they stepped down. So I think eventually they stepped down, but I told him, like what Greg and Gerard said, look, but they have done a lot of good, right? I said, yeah, so you should give them honor where honor is due. So have a proper farewell. Put their names on a plaque, right? Pin it onto your building so that everyone who comes in know that these were the people who started this good NSA and now they're progressing. And lastly, you have any significant events, invite all of them back. They love to be part of the community because this is close to their heart. So you balance it off. You don't. After a while, they will realize that they can still enjoy the benefits without having to worry about the governance issues anymore, because now it becomes my friend's problem, right? So I think sometimes you just need to talk to them in a way that they can understand. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Well, there you go. All the strategies on how to gracefully exit long-serving members. We now move on to the area of board commitment. I think we saw a fair bit in the earlier case study. We shall now move into case study number 2. And board members must be committed and contributing. The reality is that it's not so much about who is on the board, but how the board operates. And let's look at this case study. Charity B is made up of 13 board members who are all senior professionals and C-suites from their various sectors. As a result of their busy schedules, many of them are unable to attend board meetings, many of whom are also backbenchers and non-contributing members. The chairman subsequently set up an informal EXCO, executive committee, so that decisions can be made by a smaller team in a faster manner. The EXCO also meets up before the board meetings to discuss and pre-agree on issues to be brought to the board meetings. What are your views on this? Gentlemen, Gregory?
I'll kickstart my own analysis of this case scenario. And so if you look at this situation, you know that these 13 board members are probably very stretched, very limited bandwidth. The question I think that needs to be asked at the onset is then why were they even asked to serve? So was it a case that in this particular sector, you do need to have the heavy hitters, you do need to have people with gravitas to be representative? Is it more a case of wisdom and then other solutions that could be deployed in terms of how you engage, these leading lights of, that particular sector? Then the question is whether the Constitution mandates, some type of minimum attendance. One of the questions that I would ask practically when I serve on a board is how many board meetings per year? Then you have to gauge for yourself as an incoming board member, can you afford that kind of time? Are there other solutions? For example, alternates that could be appointed. If it really is somebody whom you must have on your board, and the person wants to commit, but sometimes may have some time constraints. Can there be a solution of having an alternative? But the problem here is, based on this case study, many of whom are also backbenchers and non-contributing members, then you have a problem on your hands because they shouldn't be there as ornaments on a shelf. There are duties, and I touched on that earlier, duties of diligence that need to be brought to bear in their service, duties of care that need to be also applied. And so from that point of view, it might be that in the case of these board members, they might be derelict of their duties. And whether or not it is a foundationally a company, a society, or trust, I think there are definitely common denominators in terms of diligence or reasonable diligence. In the case of a company limited by guarantee, Section 157 of the Companies Act requires that there be reasonable diligence. So you will fail if you don't show up, or as one of my predecessors in the Law Society used to say, anything times 0 equals to 0. Yeah. So then you have a problem here of an informal exco, which also provokes a number of queries. Ideally, the exco should be a creature of your constitution, so that it's part of the governance structure. Yes, there are times that, over and above, say, the quarterly board meeting or even the monthly meeting, some non-profits, some charities need to have an exco because you want to have decisions made expediently. You want to have a core group that can, enable, very agile and nimble solutions. So there is wisdom in some settings to have this, but then it shouldn't be informal. It should be formal, so that you can then ensure that it's part of the governance structure and it's accountable to the management, to the board or to the council, or in the case of, societies where the supreme authority vests in the members in the general meeting, at least there is some form of accountability back. The final point I make on this problem is that the exco also meets up before the board meetings to discuss and pre-agree on issues to be brought to the board meetings. Now, one point that you must understand as a board member is the need to exercise independent judgment. That is found in the Charities Code of Governance, but it's not just soft law. It's not something I can comply or explain. This is serious stuff. It's part of your fiduciary responsibilities as well. And a facet of that is you cannot fetter your discretion. So for example, if you have a smaller subset like the exco who discuss and pre-agree, who have already decided what the game plan is, predetermined, they walk into the meeting and they suspend all their judgment, whatever anyone says in that meeting, then you have a problem because you might be breaching your duties in terms of exercising independent judgment. I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah.
I think Gregory has said it all. I'll just add it in very layman's language. Responsibility cannot be delegated. You have a responsibility and you cannot delegate that to someone else. At the end, you are answerable for it. As Gregory has used the term, you have a fiduciary duty. And this scenario, those who are not the exco is living a very dangerous life because they forgot that they are responsible when something goes wrong.
Thank you. That brings us to another question that was raised earlier. Is there an existing benchmark to the maximum number of boards a director can serve on for our charities? Maybe Commissioner, you'd like to shed some light on this?
Actually depends on how busy the person is. I know some friends of mine who seem to have who are like Energizer rabbits, They're full of energy. They are on 4 or 5 different boards and they're really serving. As they're not sitting there and doing nothing. They're actually doing quite a bit of work, and so I'm not sure how to answer that, except that I think you need to look at the individual, but whether he has other commitments, whether he has the energy, whether he has the expertise, then he has to decide whether or not whether it's 1, 2, 4, or 5, or whatever the number of boards that you're on.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. There's a few questions as well surrounding this. Will be, can my donor also be on the board of directors? And they would like to know what is the advice if there are any investors who would like to make investments in businesses for charity, agency, sustainability, what is the possible arrangements in terms of shareholdings. So I suspect this is regards to the CLG type of setup, and should donors actually be also on the board of directors? Maybe from the legal perspective.
Sure, I'll take a step. I think, you need to be mindful of conflict of interest. That is the obvious thing that, stands out here. Because, for example, when it involves, decisions such as donor recognition, when it involves, other types of responsibilities which require you to make an independent judgment that is not beholden to a sectarian or even to a donor's interest. Are you able as a board to have that? In some cases, I've seen the flip side where you invite someone to the board because, for instance, they might be chairing a foundation or they have a strong repute in the charity sector. And so they are, in a sense, you could say, very strong in that skill set, but that skill set means that they will go out and raise funds, sometimes through their foundation, sometimes through other means. But that's a case in which they were incepted because of the value proposition that they bring to bear. If someone gives, monies towards a charity or donates, and then has this expectation that they also be part of management, I think, you would need to be cautious about potential conflict in terms of, whether they will be able to exercise independent judgment as a board member, because sometimes they might be driven out of, the interest of the organization that they represent, and they may not be able to manage that type of role in a meaningful way. Likewise, the board itself may face an issue on certain types of decisions. So it's best, I think, as a matter of prudence, to draw a line, and I think to find other ways to engage with that donor. For example, if they expect to participate in some of the activities, can you, sort of find some creative ways where you can engage them, include them, so that it's more than just giving $1, but you can actually view them as a partner with you, and you honor them as a partner. You find ways that you can engage with them as a partner, but that's a different thing from serving on the board.
I just to add quickly to what Greg said, I agree with him. I don't think it's a wise thing to do. I can well imagine the complications that will arise, and you're going to get yourself into all sorts of fixes. But we in the charity that I served on previously or worked with, we had a donor who gave a large sum of money, but we didn't put him on the board. But we, exactly like what Greg said, we invited the person to be part of a interview panel because the money was given to give bursaries, awards to the disadvantaged persons. So we invited them to send to sit on the interview panels, and then they have an active hand in selecting who to give the bursary to, and it's a generous bursary. And so they're very happy with the arrangements, and I think there's no need to put them on the board. I don't think you should burden yourselves with that. Thanks.
But there's also another question with regards to board commitment, is how do we measure board members' commitment besides just attendance and meetings, which we have to report anyway? Yes. So maybe Dr. Ee, through your experiences.
Well, growingly, in fact, all boards are encouraged to, and growingly you do find boards adopting some form of a board appraisal. So can come to different form. It could be board members appraising each other. The general appraisal is the board members appraise the processes in board meetings, whether is it frequent enough, whether pre-meeting materials are sufficient depth for them to understand and therefore to participate at the board meeting. But board assessment goes beyond that. There are a few organizations I've been involved with where we actually assess each other in terms of contribution. Of course, it's kept confidential, but it gives the chairman an indication when he does his planning in terms of changes in the board that he wants to make. So I think board assessment is a very important tool for you to come to some conclusion, which are the board members that are really an asset to you and which are the ones that you could consider in terms of renewing. And really at the end of the day, there will always be a few board members where after a while you realize maybe it wasn't such a good decision appointing this individual. Not that the person is bad or anything, but circumstances is such that the person just couldn't give enough of his time or his attention to the board matters. And sometimes it can happen after a person joined the board, his job changed and all of a sudden it's required to travel a lot. So I think a board appraisal done on a yearly basis, or if you think it's too much, maybe once in 2 years will go a long way to help the organization to find out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee. Just one last question on the board commitment, because we received quite a fair bit of questions that came in earlier, is regarding the motivation and encouraging of new members to join the board when members are not paid any remuneration. And it's also difficult to find people with good reputation, technical ability, and willingness to join charity boards for free. What are your thoughts about this? I received a fair bit of questions on this in the question submission. Yeah, I believe Commissioner wants to attempt at this.
No. Yeah, I read that. I read that too. But I don't think if you are on a charity board, you should be remunerated. I mean, the word is charity, so it starts with you. However, I know that if there are some expenses that you have, some of the board members have come out as reasonable because in the course of doing their work, then yes, you could remunerate them for those expenses. But as a general allowance for the year and so on and so forth, like in a corporate entity, I don't think you should do that.
I've spoken to quite a few of my friends to encourage them to join or to volunteer their time. And majority of replies is, oh, no. Once I get in, I get stuck. I cannot come out. Okay. And this is where applying the good corporate governance into your rules, where every 3 years your name comes up for renomination, reappointment. With that, it can give assurance to people and say, no, you come in for 3 years. After that, you'll come back for renomination and you can decide if you don't want to continue. And more importantly, to the mind of an individual, especially a successful individual out there in his career, why would he want to join an organization which he's not convinced have strong governance? Why take the risk? So it's in your interest, if you want to attract people and make it easier for board renewal, is to have tip-top governance that appears you take part in our charity transparency award things. Then you can tell people, no, our charity is very well organized. You join us, we don't have problem. And that's your best advertisement. If you want to attract young people, there's always foremost in your mind, why take the risk? And I don't want to get stuck. So if you have the proper procedure where you can give the young person assurance, come in for 3 years, we need your expertise at least for the 3 years. The second big question in the mind is, am I taking a risk to be a part of the board of this organization or not? So if you can demonstrate to them that you are no risk, that you actually take governance seriously, that helps you.
Yeah, I would add that I think it's not about us, but it's about a cause or a purpose that's larger than ourselves. And I think it's how we articulate that value proposition to those who are considering whether to join in to be part of the charity or the nonprofit involved. And I mean, obviously, it can't be money perks, right? We can never match what the corporate can offer. But the question is there something that you feel you can be part of, play a meaningful role in, add value to? Part of that, I think, will involve the board chair, the board deputy chair, leadership, articulating what the vision is in the next lap, and how they see this board member playing a role in terms of helping them to achieve that vision. And sometimes that will, capture the attention, it will captivate, and it could become the magnet to draw them to be a fellow comrade in arms and to collaborate with you to build. And other times it may not. Then I think the question is, okay, if you do identify this person with a skill set and yet, they are having some question marks about commitment, are there creative ways? And I think I suggested some alternate director, or with Zoom these days, Can you zoom in and out? Is that an option that's available? Now, that doesn't mean they are passive, because they should still be active in participating in the meetings and so on. But there are some creative ways that you can continue to engage, which doesn't mean that their standards of diligence are any less than other colleagues who are serving on the board. In other words, from the point of view of the charity, how badly do you need that person to come in and fill the role of a board member? And if so, how would you be able to articulate the value proposition for that individual that goes beyond money?
Thank you so much, Gregory. Well, so we covered the areas of those you mentioned about skill sets. Dr. also talked about risk. Commissioner also talked about really being there. We now move on to a very interesting topic, board diversity. And the most obvious is gender diversity. And we heard a fair bit about having women representation on boards, but we also recognize that diversity is more than just gender, But in the recent study, leadership study by NVPC conducted in 2020, there was actually a slight increase from 31% to 35% of women representation on boards. Today, we still see male-dominated and female-dominated charities. Any thoughts on this? Would stipulating a criteria on the board diversity in a charities constitution help? Yes, I see Dr. Ee is all ready to go.
No, I think the dominance of one gender over the other in certain charities really depends on what the charity is doing. So certain activities, if it's dealing with, say, young children, or there are certain homes that specializes for teenage girls that got themselves into trouble. I would imagine having a very dominant female board who understand the needs of this young girl is more important than having a whole bunch of guys there who have really no inkling of how, boys and girls think differently. So does men and women, so I think it's useful in such a case. I can imagine there's some other charities where it tends to be a certain of the sports type organization, the more macho one, there will be more dominant in terms of men. So there's probably a reason behind it, but I really hope the end result of whether there's dominantly male or female is because the board members will pick according to the need of the organization based on skill set. And when you're neutral to gender, that opens your option. There's a bigger spread of candidates. But if you only decide, I only want to have a male member of the board, that narrows your choices, and chances of finding the right candidate is narrower. But if you're open-minded, then that expands the field and increases your chance of finding a right candidate for your organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee. So what we're hearing from you is being neutral and also being open-minded. So it's not about the male and the female. I think Gregory, yes, you want to?
Yeah, in fact, I think Dr. Ee has said it all, to borrow his phrase, in terms of the principal points to bear in mind. And I think the danger you have if you take it to extremes is that you end up with something akin to affirmative action, which you don't want, because then it detracts from the meritocracy, or from the point of view of the individual involved. They may feel that, oh, I'm there to be the token female or the token male, respectively in a male-dominated or female-dominated board. And that's not a good place that they want to be in either. But I think we should look at the question of diversity from a wider lens, in my view. Gender, ethnicity, age, occupational, and begin to examine it from that perspective, because the whole principle behind that is you really want to have multifaceted viewpoints on some of the issues that crop up in the course of that charity. You don't want to have groupthink. You don't want to have blind spots. You want to have the best counsel. And so in a kind of multitude of counselors, you get this safety net. But the other point to bear in mind is that diversity is not an end in itself. And we need to see diversity with inclusiveness. We need to understand what works in terms of the application of this for that particular charity in that stage of the charity's life cycle.
Thank you so much. This question that's being raised as well is quite interesting. We are a ROS charity and members are being elected into the council. how can we then ensure there's diversity on the board? I believe should be a member organization. Society, yes. ROS charity members are being elected into the council. How can we ensure there's diversity on the board?
So maybe I'll just make a suggestion. You might be constrained by reason of your constitution, but could there be other categories of membership? That's one idea. Could you have meetings, even if they cannot formally be on the board, where you could have attendees or observers from time to time on certain topics who might be able to expand your horizon? So for example, on the Law Society Council, I was intentional to introduce mentors who were formerly the president and the vice presidents, because they built up so much expertise. And on some issues, not everything, but in some issues, they can actually bring some domain expertise to that particular aspects. So are there, creative ways, or perhaps even have a forum for exchange? There are ways you can work around this, I feel.
Thank you so much, Gregory. In fact, this also links to two of the questions that were pre-submitted, and I believe there are some of us in the religious organizations we've here this afternoon as well. So religious organizations may have more restrictions in recruiting new board members. People with a particular faith may hesitate to serve organizations with different faith, and the organizations may also hesitate to recruit new members with a different faith for obvious reasons. So how can religious organizations nominate board members, and how do they create a pipeline of potentials? So it's really thought-provoking for the afternoon. Yes, Dr. Ee.
I think religious organizations, by its very nature, is a separate breed. So you want to talk about diversification, realistically speaking, if I'm a Buddhist organization, you cannot say I have to be diversified, so I include a Hindu, I include a Muslim. Not on my board, that's not being realistic. Let's be realistic about it. But diversity goes much more into that. And depending on your constitution, different religious organizations have different constitution. I'm more familiar with the Catholic organization that I help. So a lot of them, their constitution derive from what they call the mothership, whether it's mother house or father house, all the way back to Rome. And they have a major constitution from there that flows back down here, so the hands are certainly tied as far as the religious part of it. So the religious organization has their own unique challenges. But where I'm involved, I always make sure that apart from that, when they do the charity work, is to corporatize a separate entity altogether, where the entity itself then can follow all our corporate governance rules and so forth in Singapore, and keep the religious part itself religious by nature, because it really does need a separate sort of outlook and treatment into it. So some of that, even for the Catholic and some of the Christian group, they even have a statute. The statute for archdiocese of in the case of Anglican and the Catholic, so that is governed from there already, So we are in no position to say you should then follow some other laws and things like that. So that's a very separate thing altogether. But within it, they should still strive for diversity, for sustainability, based on the type of individuals that they can consider for their candidates. In diversity in terms of skill sets and knowledge. So again, speaking for the only area where I'm more familiar with, like in the case of the Catholic organizations, you have people who are specialists in accounts. Some of them were they were accountants or even lawyers before they became a priest. So if you employ them, you are tapping on their knowledge for that one. Some of them actually even are certified. I got a principal, a religious brother to be my principal in SGI when I was the chairman, because I discovered that he actually was certified and worked for MOE before. So he's qualified to be a principal, So you can have diversity that way within it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee. So we can see the diversity is not just on gender alone, but basically it's on skill sets, on experience. Yeah. Okay, so there's just one hot question that's received 35 votes. It's quite alarming. Can non-board member involve in board member election and selection? Yeah, maybe you'd like to shed some light on this. 35 votes. Yeah, can non-board member involve in board member election and selection?
Well, I think there are a lot more facts we need to get on that particular question, but let's think this through. Because I think the example in the parenthesis is pro bono consultant. So I'm not sure what type of consultant that is. But to the extent that you are trying to get someone, say, who has organizational experience in the sector, or who's very strong in, say, HR, etc., then one thought is that can they serve on the nomination committee? Can you set up a structure? If you think that this particular non-board member might be able to give some valuable expertise and lend some experience, in terms of the recommendation process, in terms of asking the right questions, in terms of shortlisting, can they be part of that process? That means, of course, they can't be part of the governance structure because the NomCom will recommend, and then it's up to the board to then decide. I think you will have, in most charities, a problem if you have a non-board member involved in, the provenance of election or selection, because in most constitutions, that choice is either left to, the members at the general meeting, or if you want to co-op, it's left to the board. So to the extent that, you are actually introducing a new factor into the equation who's not recognized in your polity, then you have a problem, because questions will be asked about the legitimacy of this election or selection process. So let the consultant be a consultant. Just take advice from that person, but don't get them involved in the decision making. That could be one way to deal with it. So you draw a distinction between the informative aspects and the performative aspects of what is needed for this type of recruitment and refreshing the board.
Thank you so much, Gregory. Well, in fact, if you do have challenges finding board members, please come to see us at CMPL. We will be happy to help you to find. But then again, as what Gregory mentioned, you make the selection. We give you the recommendations. We now quickly move on to this topic on collaboration. And I believe that this is actually a very, very big topic, and I believe our colleagues later will also share on some grants on collaboration. So collaboration brings people and organizations, including charities, closer together, foster new ideas and partnerships, and ultimately creates a greater impact and effectiveness. So perhaps let's hear what are some of this. Sometimes before we collaborate, right? Sometimes charities are afraid to collaborate. Is whose IP and who shall be the lead agency? Yeah. So how do we really foster collaborations? Any thoughts on this? Perhaps, Commissioner?
I think instinctively, I notice human beings like to do their own thing. I don't know, it's a human instinct. But people come together to work together when they think that the collective outcome has a mutual benefit for both of them. So similarly, I've seen, I think in the case of a charity or organizations, if you want to collaborate, more often than not, I notice is when there's a push factor for you to decide that the outcome is something that is beneficial for both of us, and then you decide to work together. So I guess if you have a common outcome, 2 charities, 3 charities, there's something that you are working toward, and you think that you can do better when you come together than doing it on your singly, then you should collaborate. But in your collaboration, I've also noticed that sometimes the idea is great, but in the execution of it, you end up quarreling with each other, right? Especially when it comes to dividing whatever the donations or the collections that you have made. So in the process of working out collaboration, please be clear. Everybody understands what each other is in for, how the rules are going to be, and whose role, who is playing which role and which part of it. Otherwise, you'll end up from being friends to end up being enemies. Yeah.
To add on to what Commissioner has said, I think start slowly, start incrementally if you need to. Like all things, if you need to do a project together with that partner, do a project first. And then, when you see enough comfort levels and that, it sets the stage for greater collaboration, you could then formalize it by way of an MOU. That could be another tool that you can use where you scope out the areas of collaboration. I think like what Commissioner says, I think honestly, the danger is that we become very solo and silo, and in settings in which, I've been involved in, when I've brought in various, players in that particular ecosystem together, and they each start, discerning what each one is doing, then they start realizing there's a bigger picture here. And I don't have to do what you do because you are strong in this area and I'm strong in this area. And, you identify your niche that way. So I think, yeah, it is human nature. I agree with Commissioner, but for the sake of synergies and being able to play to strengths, there is a value in collaboration. But like all things, start slow, start small, and then build from there. We've had the joy, LawSoc Pro Bono Services of, for example, most recently signing an MOU with SG Cares and so on. And so we've seen the power of that type of collaboration. And for us, we do try and identify who are the like-minded partners, and we hope that the partners also find us a like-minded partner.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Dr. Ee, we reserve an interesting question for you. Yeah, so this also...
I think this one, something important to say. I subscribe to everything that Gregory has said, but I have an important message to organizations. Ask yourself, are you here just to build up your organization, or are you here to serve the people? And no two organizations have the same strength, capability. If you are here to serve the people, find out the needs of the people. And some of the needs can be fulfilled by you, and others not by you, but by some other organization. So if you are here, if you exist to serve the people, you would be interested in finding another organization that can complement you to fulfill the needs of the people that you supposedly care for. The trouble that I see is many organizations only think of just growing bigger and bigger and fly their flag and try to do everything themselves. And that's where that I sometimes feel very disappointed.
Thank you so much. You actually answered half of the second question. So basically, some members of my board are also serving on other charity boards and companies. Would there be potential conflict of interest in such collaborations? And they often say this is done with best interest or in the spirit of collaboration. For the people, like what you said. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think that depends on the dynamics. Potentially, there could be a conflict, but it depends on the dynamics. Being on the common board can help to pull the two organizations together. But it really depends on the rest of the board members and the dynamics among themselves. So there are certain circumstances, I'm in one organization where the religious organization owns several charities. So being appointed the group chairman, that means I chair each of the individual, I pull them all together and make sure there's a common vision, that we all are rowing in the same direction. So there could be instances where it is useful, but it must be done with a purpose and the outcomes that you expect out of it.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Ee. I think, I think the starting question for those board members, even before they accept the board appointment, is that, is there going to be a situation of potential conflict? If so, is that something navigable? I'll come back to that point in a minute. But, or is it going to enable a greater unity of purpose between, the various charities involved who maybe in some cases already working together? And so, then this actually catalyzes the growth both ways, or turbo boosts it, because this person is a bridge and this person is able to, basically play this valuable kind of bridge building role. The OB markers are still transactions or proposed transactions between the two charities. That one you have to be super careful about, obviously, because that opens up the whole Pandora's box on conflict of interest, right? So you need to, where it involves a transaction or proposed transaction, abstain from that decision making. and all the other conflict rules, for which I know that that's not what we're covering in this webinar, but that's where you need to firstly not only disclose in terms of the list, but have your antenna up. Your colleagues need to have your antenna up as well to make sure that you don't participate when it involves transactions with that particular charity.
Oh, thank you so much, Gregory and Dr. Ee. We now have some time to look at some of the Q&A. Basically, what I've done is that in that hour, we sort of like summarize all your 140 questions that you've asked prior to this webinar, and now we take some questions that you have posed in Pigeonhole as well. I believe this question is to COC. 34 votes. What is the COC's view and advice on charities or NPO desiring to set up business subsidiaries to generate income to support the charity's work?
I don't think that there's anything wrong in setting up businesses, but you must make sure that the business you set up is in line with your charity objectives. Number one, yeah. So the number two, and you do set it up, then you must make sure you appoint the right people to run your charities and make sure there's no conflict of interest. More often than not, I've seen charities that set up subsidiaries, and sometimes the subsidiaries are related to members in the charity board. So, and sometimes it's easier to do that because they actually do have running businesses for which it helps serve the charity's interests. However, then you must declare your conflict of interest, recuse yourself, step out when the elections are made, and of course you must make known that you are sitting on both sides of the fence. So you need to have some of the precautions there. The other thing is that you must make sure that whatever businesses you set up, you don't go and deplete the resources of the charity, because that charity money actually came from the public. Yeah. Thanks.
If I can just add one point to what Commissioner has, I think, brilliantly summarized for us. Also bear in mind that the skill sets that are required for the business subsidiary will be very different from the non-profit, right? You've got a for-profit and non-profit. So again, you've got to find the right type of board members or stewards for that entity.
Thank you so much, Gregory. There's also another question is that when mismanagement is noted, how do board members work with COC to correct it when key appointments want to hide information? This sounds serious though. Yeah. When key appointments want to hide information. 32 votes.
The key appointments to hide information. Good grief. Okay, this is a generally this is how it's done. If there's an allegation that's made, we do go in and we will interview or we ask the charity involved what this is about. And actually there are three types of reactions that we normally typically will get. Sometimes when you go in and then if you see that there is really some mismanagement of funds and it borders on the criminal, then the job of my officers and I become very easy, because we just make a police report, right? Because there is likelihood that a criminal activity had taken place. So that's the easiest of all. The second one are people who are a group of people who are actually well-meaning, but they have very poor governance and they make all sorts of silly mistakes that shouldn't be made, but not deliberately, right? Because of lack of competence and issues. So these are the charities that will come alongside and we'll work with them, help set up and structure their governance, and we'll get LawSOC to come in to help us, or if it's a religious group, then we get the apex organizations to help us, which they have from whether it's HEB or Taoist Federation or Buddhist Federation and so on and so forth. And the apex organizations have helped recommend accountants, lawyers to rewrite the constitution, work out the internal processes and so on and so forth. These are the good charities to work with because they know they have done something wrong, not criminal, but they can put it up, get it right again. Then there are some who have done wrong, but want to continue doing wrong. So it's called the commissioner's inquiry orders, and so you have to issue orders and stuff like that in order to get them to see some light. It's unpleasant but necessary. Yeah, but please, if you have done something that is not that's not right, but it was a genuine mistake, nobody's going to kind of kill you and jump on you for that matter. But as long as it's not criminal, and then it doesn't become a police case. I hope I answered that question.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. in the pre-questions as well, this came up quite a fair bit on ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And ESG has been a key theme, and how should the charity sector prepare or embrace this? And the relevance of ESG for the long-term development of a SSA, for a social service agency. Any thoughts and ideas on ESG?
I think the G is a given. I mean, all charities have to follow the governance. So, and the next question is social. I think to a great extent, as a charity, you would be addressing that issue. It's only the E that you need to ponder upon. And that one you're talking about environment, and you can easily participate in that by being environmental conscious in the way you do things, in the sort of disposables that you use, energy efficient. When you decide to retrofit, expand your premises, consider using more solar panels and things like that. So there are ways of participating in it, but you don't have to be ahead of the race. Just be conscious of it, and whatever you do, like food wastage and all this, just to make sure that you have alternative plans. Check. Sometimes people get a bit selfish, even if you are a charity. You know, people donate to you a lot of goods, and you just hang on to it. You know, I would advise check the expiry date, and if you cannot use it all up, give it away to another charity so that they can use it. So some of the charities I'm involved with are extending arrangement, and because I run schools, so I have 1,000 over children. So from time to time, I get a phone call, my principal get very excited. A truck will arrive and have like 1,000 bottles of milk with 1 to 2 days to expiry, you know. So straight away we give out to all the children and drink milk. So it's win-win to everybody. My children get, you know, all the calcium and all this. So they're just be conscious of it and see how you can practice to as much as to a large extent.
Thank you so much, Dr. In fact, that's also a very good example for collaboration as well. Yeah, for charities to partner with each other to help to distribute in-kind donations as well.
Yeah, especially during COVID, because I'm in the schools I'm looking after is in MacPherson area, not too far from Willing Hearts. So during COVID, many of my children, the families, the bread earner lost their job and they struggle to put food on the table. So I link up with Willing Hearts and they say, okay, so for a few days, they send me extra 150 packs of food and I give to the family. So they fulfill their mission. I fulfill my mission and helping it out. So collaboration can take you a long way. You don't have to do it yourself. It'll be silly of me to try and raise donation and then get hire cooks who can cook food for them. There's already someone doing it. It's just a matter of collaborating with them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee. Well, in the essence of time, we shall now bring our Q&A session to a close. But before that, perhaps I'd like to invite each of our panelists to share with our fellow leaders a single takeaway in case, you know, they couldn't remember what we talked about in the last an hour or so. You know, so what's the one key takeaway that our leaders must remember?
Please submit your annual report or financial statements and do up your GC.
That came from the commissioner himself. Okay.
I think increase your effort in achieving the highest standard of governance because it will help you to recruit new members to your board, as well as prepare you for the next surprise that hits us here in Singapore.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ee.
I would say when you're trying to identify your board members in the charity sector, you need people with a good mind and a good heart. And so the fundamentals for me are the competency and character. I think a lot of other things, you know, you can sort of grow them over time. We talked about chemistry and getting to know someone, but competency and character are the non-negotiables.
Thank you so much, Gregory. We now bring our panel discussion to a close. We hope you find our event in conversation with the Commissioner of Charities and the Charity Council 2022 useful. For our audience watching through Zoom, your feedback will help us to make future events more relevant and useful. Once again, the event feed ends you will receive the survey on your browser, and we will appreciate your feedback on today's session. For our audience present, do drop your feedback forms at the registration table on your way out. So thank you once again, Commissioner of Charities, Dr. Ee and Greg, for spending your time with us this afternoon and your invaluable insights. With that, on behalf of the Commissioner of Charities, Charity Council, Law Society Pro Bono Services, and the Center for Nonprofit Leadership, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We will now invite the panel to take a seat off stage while I will hand the mic over to Ms. Chan Kai-Jia from the Charities Unit to share with us about the Charity Capabilities Fund and the public consultation on simplified code. Kai-Jia, over to you.
Thank you, Kitson. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kai-Jia from the Charities Unit. Previously, we had the VWO Charities Capability Fund. On 1st April, the fund was renamed the Charities Capability Fund and has been extended for another 5 years to March 2027. I would like to briefly share what the fund offers. There are 5 grants under the fund. The first one is the training grant. Board members and staff who would like to attend the training courses pertaining to governance and management courses in areas such as fundraising, financial management, and internal controls can tap on this grant. Funding is up to 80% of course fee, capped at $1,000 for Singaporeans and permanent residents. For employment pass, work permit, and S-pass holders, the funding is up to 60% of course fee, capped at $750. Next, for charities that would like to engage an external consultants to help review and draft governance and management related policies, you may tap on the consultancy grant. For small and medium charities, the funding is 80%, capped at $100,000. For the large charity, the cap funding is $50,000. Next, we have the shared services grant that supports charities who wish to outsource its corporate functions such as accounting and human resource management to external shared services providers. Charities can be funded up to 2 years. The first year of funding is 50% of the monthly charges, and for the second year, the funding is 25% of the monthly charges, capped at $30,000 per charity. Next, for the Info Communications Technology Grant, to encourage digital adoption, the ICT grant funds basic infrastructure components such as computers, printers, and broadband account. The funding is 80% of the cost fee, subjected to caps per item. It also funds the adoption of digital solutions in areas such as accounting management, donor management, human resource management, etc. Charities are funded up to 80% of the cost, capped at $40,000 per charity. Lastly, we have the collaboration grant. Charities that would like to collaborate to enhance their governance and productivity processes can consider this collaboration grant. Projects are funded up to 80% of the cost, capped at $50,000. The National Council of Social Service, NCSS, is the fund secretariat for the Charities Capability Fund. Charities may submit their applications anytime throughout the year for all the grants. Training grant applications is done through the NCSS e-services portal. For the other grants, charities can apply via our SG grant portal. Should you have any questions regarding the fund, you may contact the fund secretariat. Besides the Charities Capability Fund, there is also a Tech and Go funding for charities. The fund is for charities who would like to adopt large-scale, specialized IT solutions. The funding is 80%, capped at $300K. Charities can also go through an IT consultancy project first to identify its IT needs before deciding what IT systems to implement. The funding details are available on the charity portal and NCSS website. You may scan the QR code here for more information. In addition, NCSS will be organizing 2 briefing sessions on Zoom to share the details of the fund and its application process. The sharing sessions will be on 22nd April and 6th May. An email on the sharing sessions has been sent to your charity's contact person yesterday. My colleague will also type the registration link in the Zoom chat box below. Funding aside, we believe that charities would be familiar with the Code of Governance for Charities and IPCs. It was first introduced in 2007 and last reviewed in 2015. The Charities Unit and the Charity Council have embarked on an exercise to review the code and its relevance to the charity sector. In the coming months, we will be reaching out to charities to seek your views on the draft recommendation. More details on the consultation will be shared with you next month. So do keep a lookout for it. Thank you and wishing all a good evening ahead.